here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we'd love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of Howard Bronson, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry, and all that other groovy stuff. Was in a band called Mogan David and his Winos, who have just had an album which was titled Savage Young Winos, reissued. This came out, I believe, in the mid-70s, and after life in the band, Harold went on to form Rhino Records, which you're going to find out more about in this fascinating interview. So after several minutes of interest and casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Harold, it's over to you.
Well, I will tell you, but let me just give you an example, just because I'm a big glam rock fan as well. And just as a little anecdote, because I think you'll be amused by this. In my 20s, I was a rock journalist. And in December 1971, I interviewed Mark Bolan. This was in Hollywood. And he was, big in England at that time, but he hadn't had a hit here yet, which he ultimately only had one hit, which was, Bang a Gong, Get It On. But so what I'm saying is that, not that many people knew who he was, but to this day, the most charismatic person that I've ever spent time with was with him, close to an hour. So I was a big Mark Bolan fan, big fan of glam rock, and as you know, a lot of those records and some of the artists that were big in England really didn't make it in the U.S.
But zilch, virtually, weren't they? There was not very. It wasn't a very. It didn't sort of somehow travel well, did it at all? I don't know what was the reason. I suppose at that time, that 60s coming into the 70s period was transforming into some heavy rock, but then it was also the singer-songwriter, and somehow
exactly. Well, you know what? Let me take a couple steps back, and then we're going to flow into exactly what you're saying. So to answer your question, really, it was the Beatles. I was aware of pop music and, had bought some records prior to that, but it was the Beatles and the artists of the British Invasion, and then a little bit later, the American artists. But, the thing about the Beatles, aside from, the everything that's great about them, there was a real exuberance about their music. And if you think about it, a lot of that music at the time, listening to it, what it translated most was it felt great to be alive. When you think about, the energy and I want to hold your hand or She Loves You. It was just, it was really different from, records that had come previously. So in 1964, big Beatles fan, number 2, Dave Clark 5.
Yes.
Then rolling into 1965, still the Beatles, but then Herman's Hermits started to accede, and that was maybe like number 2 for me. Dave Clark 5 dropped a little bit, Rolling Stones. Then a little bit later, that the Kinks, and then of course, maybe a year or two after that, the Who, Yardbirds, and then as the American groups started to ramp up, the Turtles, Lovin' Spoonful, Paul Revere and the Raiders, that sort of element. So a big impact for me. After I graduated high school, I went to UCLA, and in reading the Daily Bruin, the newspaper,
Yes.
I got the idea of, about writing about music, or more specifically, record reviews. So that was the Daily Bruin. And so I wrote for the paper, and I got good enough while I was at UCLA. So rather than earning money with a summer job, I was able to get paid by writing about music for the rock magazines, Rolling Stone most prominently, but Rock Magazine, Phonograph Record Magazine, that sort, to the point where getting a little bit familiar with record companies and the publicity departments primarily, when I realized I wanted to work for a major label.
Yes.
And while I was at UCLA, that's so I had my rock band in high school, but we didn't really play out. It was just for our fun. That evolved a bit at UCLA. Some of the writers for the entertainment section who wrote about music, they also played instruments. So that's where we formed the UCLA version of Mogan David and his Winos,
Right.
where we started to play out. We recorded a little bit, and again, that was um, built around writers from the Daily Bruin. So
Yes, that was quite interesting because I realized I did an interview with Paul last year actually with his little
oh,
book. There you
good,
go.
yes.
So
Well,
he's
there's the photo. Yeah, there's the photo of us in his book
is there right?
of the
Oh, look at
band.
that.
Yes,
Nice.
I don't know
Okay.
what page it's on, but
No, but there's a section in the middle with photos. But then just going back a bit earlier then. So what was your
yes,
sort of very early kind of before 64 and the Beatles? What was kind of on your radar at that time? Because you would have probably had a
okay.
bit more.
I'm glad you asked that question. So in the 50s and into the 60s, you had, in America, what they called novelty records, or comedic songs. Alan Sherman, Hello Mudda Hello Fada, Purple People Eater. Those seemed like that there was always at least one of those in the top 40. And I love those records. Stan Freberg was very big in the US in the 1950s, a big influence on myself. Um, and so I really gravitated to those. And some of the initial records I bought were, like Alan Sherman, for instance. And in fact, where that relates to all of this and the Mogan David and his Winos reissue album is the first record I ever recorded with that band of musicians from UCLA was Nose Job, which had been
Oh
originally a
yes.
Mad Magazine. It was a Mad Magazine record. And I just loved it, and the Mad Magazine version is very doo-wop, kind of
Mhm.
pointed towards humor. With ours, I wanted to do it really straight, meaning that I kind of thought of singing in a sense like Mick Jagger. Not that I tried to sound like him, but to try to be very deadpan. So
Right.
you're singing these silly lyrics about she got a nose job, but singing it really straight. Kind of a parallel of that would be when Leslie Nielsen acted in the Naked Gun movies.
Oh yes.
He played it really straight, and even though they were hilarious movies. So yeah. So again, that. But I mean, a lot of other records I took note of. I mean, obviously surf music.
Yes.
uh, Beach Boys, Jan and Dean. You'd hear a record like Surf City, two girls for every boy. Wow,
Yes.
what an image, what a concept. So, I was definitely aware of a lot of music, didn't have much of a budget to make purchases when I was really young. But
Yes. But there was I was just going to say,
yeah,
a lot of people, like, say David Bowie and Lemmy, both born in 1947, whenever they were asked their musical influences, they both would say, Little Richard, then it was Elvis, and then it would be this kind of Fats Domino, Ray Charles, people like that, as well as Buddy Holly, Eddie Cochran. How, were those people also on your radar, or were you going on a slightly different track at this stage?
well, I was aware of them, but you also have to think, because I was younger, think about um, Little Richard. And, that could be, or even on Jerry Lee Lewis on a different level, but a lot of that could be a little bit threatening to somebody who was really young. When you think about, Little Richard, I mean, a little bit later, when you're a little bit older, I mean, Little Richard comes across almost like a cartoon character.
Yes.
Um, so, yeah, it was, by the way, also, you'd see a lot of these artists on TV, whether it be the Ed Sullivan Show or
Yes.
whatever. But actually, more specifically to answer your question, I love the records of the Coasters. But if you think about the Coasters, they were very comedic. Charlie Brown, Yakety Yak, and then I also liked Buddy Holly. Very melodic, very musical. So my two favorite artists from the 1950s were Buddy Holly and the Coasters. I didn't buy those records when I was young. I bought those records, when I was, probably in my late teens, early 20s, because I didn't really have a budget when I was, really young. Yeah.
Yes. Well, then as you navigated the 60s, then, so when did the band start, by the way? What sort of, was this kind of around 1969? And then, between 70 to 75, that was the kind of the period of your band?
Right. But the high school era of it was maybe 67, 68. But let me kind of uh, talk about the first record. So this was in December 1969, and there were four of us, three of us who were writers at the Daily Bruin.
Yes.
So the lead guitar player on the first record we did, Nose Job, backed with The Big War, was Jonathan Kellerman, who later on became a New York Times best-selling author of murder mysteries. Jonathan Kellerman.
Right.
So we recorded that in the piano player's in his parents' living room. I got a really good balance on my tape recorder. It was a 2-track tape recorder, a Telectro tape recorder. The instrumental backing turned out really well. The problem for me is when I went to record the vocals, the syncing mechanism didn't quite work.
Right.
Months later, with three of my high school friends who were also at UCLA, we rented an apartment near campus. Our across the hall neighbor was George Carlin, the comedian, who was in a transition from being the short-haired, straight comedian to
Yes.
being the long hair. And we became friendly. I think he liked me because he was into music and rock and roll, and because of that's what we used to talk about mostly. But anyway, what I want to say is that I borrowed his tape recorder to record the vocals in our tiled bathroom,
Yes.
and then I mixed those to another 2-track that a friend had. So that became the first record.
Was that The
And
Big War?
yes, The Big War. It was inspired by, I was a big fan of the Zombies, the Odyssey and Oracle album.
Oh God, yes. So did you like that album at the time and not 40 years later then, like most people?
Odyssey and Oracle?
Yes.
Oh, I loved it. I remember I bought it at Crane's Records in Inglewood, California. I think the only song we'd heard at that point was "Time of the Season," which was starting to become a big hit. But there's a song on that album, "The Butcher's Tale," by
Right.
Chris Wright. It's about World War One, and that inspired The Big War.
Right. Okay. Yes. Well, it was interesting because I did an interview with Colin from the band, and yes, because I think they'd broken up when that album they'd
Yes.
released it, and then they broke up, and that was the end of that. They just had to go and do other things, and it was only when I don't know, was it the 90s that people started going on about this record, and then this interest came. But you were there on the zeitgeist. This is very impressive.
Thank you. So what I want to say is that we did that, and with a little bit of a different configuration, because Paul Rappaport replace Kellerman because Kellerman had graduated. So we did another single about that was a couple years later, and then maybe a year after that we did another single, but I didn't release it because I thought we could probably get more attention and more mileage from doing an album.
Yes.
So that's the album that is on March 6th will be re-released. Savage Young Winos by Mogan David and his Winos. And let me kind
Yes.
of go into this a little bit. So I
So
copied.
but just so
Go ahead.
briefly, because
Go ahead.
it's kind of a curious period. Because during
Sure.
that time, 67, Summer of Love, everybody's really happy, optimistic. It was swinging, really, wasn't it, at that stage? And then a couple of years passed. You had the Charles Manson moment. The drugs were getting a bit sort of black and dark and sort of seedy. Then we have the death of Brian Jones, and then 1970, Hendrix, Joplin, Morrison all go, and then the breakup of the Beatles. Now that must, considering you started in '64 with the Beatles, that 6 years must have felt quite an intense period, I would have thought. And sort of, where does music go for the 1970s? How did you navigate that time?
Um,
Because
well, I mean,
so we get a bit, we get, oh my God, so and so's died, and you think, well, it is sad, but they are 70, 60. I'm not being blasé, but when 27-year-olds die that you've been worshipping, and they're thinking, oh dear, that's and 3 in 1 year. I mean, let's face it, Oscar Wilde would have problems trying to think of some amusing little thing like little quote for that. So yes, I'm just curious.
Okay, well, let me give you a side step away, and then we'll come back to it. Let me give you a better example. When you're a music fan, you don't really know what goes on, with a band, or how personalities work together. If there's problems, your awareness is very limited. So I'll give you the first kind of mini trauma as it relates to the world of rock and roll is when Brian Jones, left the Rolling Stones. It's almost like it seemed inconceivable because you kind of looked upon a rock and roll band as a band of brothers because you see them playing together and they make this great music together. Like I said, you don't really know about what goes on, or the competition, or somebody stole somebody's girlfriend, like with a later example being Johnny and Joey Ramone. I mean, you don't know any of that stuff when you're just a casual fan. So a lot like Brian Jones, when he died, which was before the other examples you gave. I mean, that was kind of a real shock. Like, how could you really embrace that? It was kind of difficult. So, but what you're talking about is kind of two different things. So when you mentioned about the heaviness of Manson, well,
Yes.
that was kind of different from rock and roll and acts or music you were listening to. So I mean, there was a lot of social upheaval, the Vietnam War and stuff like that. But that was separate from your focus on music, or what are the new records, or let me listen to this, that sort of thing.
Yes, but did you ever have that kind of panic about being drafted for the Vietnam War? Was that ever sort of a conversation that people started having?
Okay, it was a concern. Obviously, they had a student deferment, which I was under. And then at a certain point, when they had a numerical system, I didn't have a high number, but it was high enough that it was away from, if they were taking the first 120 numbers, maybe I was 135 or something like that. So yes, it was of some concern, but fortunately, it wasn't more than that.
Yes, but then it gives you obviously like the sort of Jan and Dave and the Beach Boys, but Brian Wilson got quite involved with the Manson, and it must have been a little bit of a this is getting a bit dark at the moment. Even if you're young, we used to have the occasional sort of person who started murdering somebody in a region like Leeds or Manchester or London, and there's suddenly that's in the news, and you start thinking, oh yes, I better be a bit careful, or yes, whatever. I just wondered what it was like for you. You were sort of at that very excitable age, but at the same time, you suddenly realise the world is also a little bit dark. It's got a darkness, and then the Beatles break up and things, the end of the party, really, isn't it?
Yeah, by the way, speaking of dark records, the Rolling Stones' Let It Bleed, Gimme Shelter, that's a perfect example of something that's, you know,
Or Midnight
a very
Rambler.
record, but so it's not like we weren't unaware of some of that stuff. But I just think, I just, like I said, I just think whatever you were experiencing non-musically in the world was kind of, separate from as you would relate to or enjoy or focus on the music.
Yes, yes, but I suppose because the 1970s, then when you start the band, this is with the lineup that is quite consistent for the next few years, which is
Yeah.
kind of what mostly is on this new or reissued album.
Okay. Okay. So let me kind of like tell you what we wanted to do. So I thought I could get more attention with an album rather than a third single. So I put together, I figured let's do like a history of the rock band, even though there wasn't much history at that point. And so I was inspired by the Who's Live at Leeds album, where they had the inserts.
Yes.
But for us, rather than cool inserts, I thought I kind of partly made fun of the band. So, for instance, Paul Rappaport's music test from UCLA that has a big F on it. So, we did the cover sheet on that, or we do crazy fan letters. It was, let's make it really interesting. And that was part of the appeal of the package.
Yes. No, nice. So then,
So let me just, I mean, we can talk about that a lot, but let me just say that, so on the reissue, I left a few tracks off, which were some of the early ones that weren't that good. And some of the subsequent recordings we did, um, were added to it. So the reissue is, I think, a much stronger record. And I did a new liner notes, which tells the story and gives background on a lot of that material, and including the visualization of some of the inserts that we had, which are part of the liner notes and the insert.
yes. When you were in that early 70s period, did you find, like as being a writer and being in the music industry, bands can have a moment in one period, but then, if they take a bit of time off, coming back, suddenly the landscape changes again. Did you feel that the 1970s was a bit of a tricky period for where you sort of stood in the scheme of things, in the sense that there was the singer-songwriters in America, there was the glam rock in here, the heavy rock and the Led Zeppelins happening, Black Sabbath and people. Did you feel a little bit like, the 70s wasn't quite the right period for the band on some level, that might have been better in the late 60s?
Well, it's an interesting question. So we were focused primarily on what we liked and what we wanted to do. We weren't really ambitious, meaning like we didn't look around and think, oh, we really want to make it. What are other successful rock bands doing? Let's be like that. We didn't do that. We were, like I said, true to what we wanted to do. So we loved, as I mentioned, a lot of the music from the 60s. So most of our set, we did songs from those artists. We did Glad All
She's
Over by the Dave Clark Five, or we did Can't Explain by The Who, or we did, songs by Paul Revere and the Raiders, etc. And at least in Los Angeles, I wasn't aware that anybody else was doing it. So what I'm saying is that, the artists in the early 70s that were really big, when you think about Santana or Yes, or maybe Deep Purple. You mentioned Led Zeppelin, but kind of progressive rock bands or rock bands. A lot of guitar solos and elongated songs. We were thinking 2.5 minute, 3 minute, singles like the rock bands that we loved, British and American, from the mid to late 60s. So what I'm saying, in a sense, we weren't ambitious in the sense that we were out of time.
Yes.
We were not of the time, but it was what we enjoyed doing. And when we played live, people really liked what we did, but we weren't really thinking, that anything more than that was feasible.
Right. Yes. So did you have quite a consistent lineup during that sort of 70s period?
Yeah,
That's
so most of the songs, the originals, wrote with Mark Leviton, who also wrote for the paper. And for instance, the second single, which was when Paul joined the band, Street Baby, backed with Party Games. I wrote those two with Mark. Those were the first two songs we wrote. And that even extends to, well, the last time the band played live, we played UCLA. We headlined at the Grand Ballroom, and this was in 1973. And 20 years later, Paul was coming into town. So I said, why don't we do a 20-year reunion? Let's cut two new songs. So this is 1993.
right.
And one of the songs I loved, do you know The Pursuit of Happiness? I'm an Adult Now.
Yes.
So I just think it's a great record because, it deals with the concept, of a rock and roll fan or somebody in a band, growing older where they can't, you know, behave like they did, in their 20s. I'm an adult now. Like, what do I do? I can't do this. I can't do that. I think it's a brilliant song. So we did a cover of that. And then Mark Leviton and I wrote the B-side, a Cover Girl. So, and that, so, for the most part, that reunion was, pretty much the group in the, 1972, 73 when we played out.
So 1990. So your session was in 1993 when you sort of had a reunion session and sort of did it. Did that feel quite enjoyable, having that 20-year gap and then sort of getting the band back together? It's quite Spinal Tap, really.
What was remarkable about that is that, which I didn't think we never thought about before, but we had an identifiable sound, meaning like you could listen to the band in the 1973 recordings, and you could listen to it in 1993, and there's a consistency there. So I think that was kind of the big revelation there. And but the other thing is, from having produced records for Rhino Records, um, I'd grown in the studio. I became much more familiar than I was when my early 20s, when I had really almost no experience except for doing the band stuff.
Yes.
So I was able to bring that knowledge to the 1993 recordings, and so that even though they sound like a rock band, there's more elements there, arrangements and sound and ideas, because of my progress there. By the way, I should say, so the album is coming out March 6th.
Yes.
And anybody who wants to hear it, when it comes out, or there's, certain singles being released beforehand. I mean, however people, hear things, whether it's, a streaming service or whether it's on YouTube. And, but it will be available on album, on CD and digital download, and in the various vendors where people buy things, and also including people can buy it on Bandcamp.
Yes, good old Bandcamp. We love that place, don't we? So yes, because I sort of doing lots of interviews. Most bands have a bit of a 5-year narrative, and they have that sort of 12-month honeymoon period. They get a single, and in the 80s we had John Peel. The John Peel show was kind of essential for that kind of first exposure in a John Peel session. You get the first album, do a bit of a tour around the country in your transit van. Then the second. Not many bands kind of last beyond 5 years. So your band was very much the 5-year period, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was not quite that long, but yeah, close to it. Yes, you're right. Never thought of it that way, but
And,
yeah.
and and you mentioned yes, and I remember my brother was a big prog rock fan in the 70s. So, I'd sneak into his room and listen to those records by Yes, Genesis, Barclay James Harvest, Wishbone Ash, and the solo work of Rick Wakeman. Did you, when you were sort of at that age, we were still very young, to be honest, were you sort of also thinking, God, there's a whole new sound coming out here, and the kids are definitely getting quite complex, and quite massive productions and massively ambitious. Did that also feel like at times you were sort of not quite in the groove with what was happening?
Well, it's interesting you say that. Yeah, very selectively. So, my real orientation, I loved the idea within a rock band of the single, the 2.5 minute, 3 minute single, for a lot of reasons, but it focused your ideas and you had to arrange it to really get the point across and also be appealing musically rather than something that might be, meandering or have a long guitar solo or numerous solos. So I'm not going to say I didn't like the progressive bands. I think I probably had like will be most of the Emerson, Lake and Palmer, early albums. I think I had like 4 of their albums, and maybe I had the first couple Yes albums. But for the most part, like Tales of Topographic Oceans is that wasn't something that was my cup of tea, for instance. I think you get the idea. I like
Yes.
the conciseness rather than the meandering.
Yes, absolutely. Then, so when did you decide that you wanted to brush the tapes up and sort of release it as a nice kind of package and sort of archive it, I suppose, in a lot of ways? When did you start sort of having those, not dreams, but thoughts?
Well, actually, it wasn't my idea. I hadn't thought about reissuing this at all. And 2022, I was contacted by um, a guy by the name of Dave Lang out of Melbourne. And he said, "Oh yeah, I picked up the original, the Savage Young Winos album at a record meet in the early '80s, and it's by and by a roommate made off of the album, and I was thinking about it, and anyway he contacted me about wanting to reissue it, and then maybe for about a year we traded emails and files, and I don't know, he has a small label, but his interest kind of gets dissipated or it didn't happen, and then maybe a year after that I was contacted by Liberation Hall. And it's
Right.
obviously taken a while, but well, I haven't seen it physically, of course, because it hasn't come out yet. I'm really happy with how it's come together. It was a matter of tracking down some of the tapes and baking them and putting those together so it sounded good. Getting where the old photos and where the inserts. And so, anyway, I did all new liner notes, which gives the
Brilliant.
story of the band, it gives the background. Let me give you just like one little slight anecdote, just because you're from Manchester, and as I mentioned earlier, I was a big fan of Herman's Hermits, who were from Manchester area.
Oh, yes.
And I became friends with Peter Noon shortly after he moved to Los Angeles. This was 1973. I'm still friends with him. I don't see him very often. But not too long after he moved here, I was thinking, he hasn't had a hit, in 2 or 3 years. I have to write my pal Peter hit record. So I got together with Mark Leviton, and I wrote this song. One of the lesser Herman's Hermit singles was "Here Comes the Star," which sounded to me like a top 10 record. It didn't do that well, but it was basically about the rock idol who's like the loneliest man in the world because he hasn't met the girl for him. So I wrote like a sequel called "All the Wrong Girls Like Me," and Mark and I worked it up, and I was really surprised that Peter didn't like it. So, but I thought it was too good of a record to just kind of lie around. So a year later, we went in the studio and we recorded that, and we did a B-side. So I put that out as by the Winos because it was more of an ad hoc group rather than the original guys. But it was yeah. So that's like, for instance, a little
Yes.
the story behind the record, that it was like, okay, this is too good to be lying in a drawer somewhere. Let's go in the studio and let's record it.
Right, because that single that they brought out, "Here Comes the Star," which was in
Yes, that's
1960,
it.
that was produced by Mickey Most. Oh,
Yes, that's right. I was a big fan of Mickey Most, and in fact, when I was writing for Rolling Stone, when I went to London the first time in 1972, he was on my short list of people to interview, and I did interview him very memorably. And I wrote it up for Rolling Stone.
yes. So then that period when you were sort of writing, you had the band, but was it kind of was glam rock your go-to kind of music during that sort of early 70s period then?
Well, it wasn't my go-to, but you have to think, as I mentioned before, when you think about, you know, the singles format, the 45, the impact of it and the conciseness of it. So you could see that, that's the music I would relate to. By the way, one of the reasons why I stopped writing for Rolling Stone, again, I was never on staff, I was a contributor, but I pitched them to do an article on glam rock because it was happening and there was all this great music, and they just kind of like, they didn't respond. And I just thought, it was too frustrating for me that when you'd figure, like, I always thought Rolling Stone should be in the vanguard of
Mm,
reporting on trends, and that and something else I pitched to them, and they weren't. It was just like, it's too frustrating writing for them. I'm just not going to try anymore.
right.
Uh, but yeah, but no,
Yes.
like I said, I mean, as you know, glam rock didn't really happen in the U.S. But
No.
a group like Mud, I thought a lot of really good records. No hits in the U.S. By
No.
the way, speaking of glam rock, um, Mark Chapman moved here in 1975, and we became friends. And I was quite often in the studio. He invited me down when he was producing various people. So, and of course, for your listeners, he and Nicky Chin wrote a lot of the sweet hits, and he produced a lot of the associated glam rock artists.
Yes. Did he work with Susie Quattro as well? Was
And
that?
he wrote the hits for Susie and produced Susie. Yes.
Wow, I know. It's also quite interesting, isn't it, that producers can sometimes have their zeitgeist moment, which can be very quite concise period. They have a sound, don't they? Or they manage to have some sort of magic moment. Fairy dust, I think they called it, didn't they? You probably heard, because you're a fan of the Trogs, aren't you? A big fan of the Trogs. You've written
Okay,
about them.
so as I mentioned, when I went to London the first time, this was August, September 72. Again, being a writer, who do I want to interview that never comes to Los Angeles? And again, as I mentioned before about being into the 1960s artists. So, Mickey Most, because of his productions with Herman's Hermits and Donovan and other people like the Yardbirds. Um, Alan Clark from the Hollies, who
Yes.
recently left the Hollies, but they had a big hit with his song that he sang on "Long Cool Woman in a Black Dress," #1 in America. So, uh, um, Paul Jones, lead singer of Manfred Mann,
All right, yes.
um, and the Trogs. And I brought Mark Leviton was in town for a few days before he went to the University of Birmingham in town, meaning London. So we interviewed the Trogs together, and it was almost like kind of like an Indiana Jones moment, when you're an archaeologist and you're going and like, hey, here are the Trogs, here they are, right in front of me. I can't believe it. And it was really enjoyable hearing their stories. And when they had a brief tour of the U.S. and they came to New York and they were talking about the sandwiches, how big the sandwiches were, and just yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, just both Mark and I were big fans of the Trogs. Yes.
Well, yes. And did you ever hear that recording that the sound engineer had when he had it playing and they were talking about sprinkle some fairy dust on
Not only did I hear it, but I was the first person to license it properly and put it out on record. The
right.
Rhino Brothers present the world's worst records, and it was on there. Yeah, it was the original Dave Pegg from Fairport
Oh,
Convention
yes.
made a tape for Jim Bickhart, who was on the first two Winos records, and he made a copy for me. So yeah, so we all had that record on, and
Yes. It kind of goes down in
by the
rock
way,
history.
I have, like Paul, I have, 3 books out. My British Invasion with those artists.
Yes,
There's Time Has Come Today, my rock and roll diaries, and the Rhino Records story. But what I want to say is, in My British Invasion, in my chapter on the Trogs, I go into the background of the Trogs tapes. And what's so interesting is the frustration, the song that they were trying to record, the name was Tranquility.
classic. It's like yeah, I'm just kind of hearing that kind of recording in my head at the moment. Yeah, it's I haven't played it for quite recently, but it's still a classic, isn't it? So then, when did you have a moment? You're in the band, you got these releases back in '74. Did you have a moment where you all sit down and sort of almost like Jim Morrison say, "This is the end"? Is it like that, or do you just stop replying to each other's calls, or does it just is apathy kind of wins the day?
Well, no, I'll tell you, the main thing is at a certain point, by the way, I remember after one of our band practices, we went to this French restaurant called Maison La Crêpe. And we were sitting around. We'd done this like, 2 or 3 times before, after band practice. And I remember saying to Paul, because Paul was, just started working full time at Columbia Records, I go, Paul, when's Columbia gonna sign us? And that's when he kind of went into, the other artists, Chicago, Santana, that they had, and just how, we just weren't that type of a band. And it was kind of in a small way, not that I had any expectations, but it was kind of illuminating. It really kind of tarnished, the fantasy. But
Yes.
more to the point, as I mentioned, Mark Leviton going to the University of Birmingham, the drummer Rob Lample, then he went to the Sorbonne. So they did their junior year at UCLA abroad. So that
Right.
was kind of what that really, the chemistry we had. And from, playing during that summer, it was like, well, they were gone. So it really kind of took the wind out of the sails, even though we, did regroup, a year or so later.
Did you did you originally
On
did
a
you
different note.
originally play drums though? Were you the original drummer?
No, what happened was on the nose job that I played on that single was there was a drummer, friend of mine from high school, and he originally committed to coming because it was on a Sunday. Okay, we got this drums, all these instruments, and he canceled. He goes, "Oh, I'm having girlfriend problems."
Right.
So I was like really pissed off. But he said, "But I'll loan you my drum set." So, I mean, had never played drums before. I did practice, beating on a Kleenex box I did have drumsticks. So, yeah, I'm, like I said, I'm surprised at how well it turned out.
Well,
being that I
yes,
never played
that's
drums before,
very,
but
because I could see on the notes that you were, on drums. And I thought that's interesting. So that was just that one off for the nose job one, and that was so. Was Mad Magazine, was that an important publication for you? And was the Fabulous Brothers, were they around during that period as well?
okay, so Mad Magazine, really important for myself, my generation, and more than my generation, not only humor, but also you know, um, introducing a young person to concepts of satire and parody, just extremely important. Um, uh, the Fabulous Freak Brothers and the Underground Comics, that was a bit, our crumb. That was a bit later. That was, for me, I remember that being yeah, maybe like 1969. I'm guessing is probably where I first became aware of that. But I mean, it's something that I would maybe flip through in a comic store, because you have to remember, because of the X-rated nature of it. It's not like you wouldn't see that on a newsstand. You'd see it in maybe a comic book store. So I wouldn't see it that often, but I would, flip through it. I would note it, but it just didn't really grab me as being, it was more like, outrageous and lascivious, rather than something that seemed that clever or
Yes.
fun.
Because you were in LA during that period. There was a lot of
Yes.
there was interest in performance artists that were also developing that time. People like the Coquettes and getting very experimental. Was that also sort of on the radar of you or the band as well? Sort of what was going on in other parts of the city.
No, I mean, because Los Angeles was, definitely an open and liberal series. Um, so, like, I remember at the Whiskey A Go Go seeing the Cycle Sluts, which was one of those.
Yes.
Coquettes, I don't know if they ever performed in Los Angeles, but I did encounter them. There was a party for Alice Cooper, a coming out party, billed kind of as a debutante party at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, and the Coquettes were there. They were like cigarette girls, and they
Right.
would, with the tray with the cigarettes on it, and it would be, cigars, cigarettes, Vaseline. That's what they were approaching people. So
And were you
yeah.
kind of, because you must have been aware of the Troubadour and people like Elton John suddenly appearing there, and you were talking about glam rock, and he sort of slightly touched on that with his flamboyant outfits, but amazing songwriting. Was he on your radar during that period?
Oh yes. By the way, to loop around with actually what you said earlier about the winos and our orientation of rock singles, 2.5 3 minute songs, and I mentioned about we were out of time or out of our element because of progressive rock. Also, as you mentioned, early 70s was also soft rock,
Oh yes, God, we
Miss
love that.
Taylor, Jackson Brown. So we weren't of that either. So, we were really alien to what we were doing in the US. Um, okay, around the time the Savage Young Winos came out in August 1973, and of course, we're talking about, the reissue that's coming out. If you look at the top 10, there was one rock song, Brother Louie by Stories. It was Helen Reddy and Diana Ross and Jim Croce and and people like that, not kind of rock and roll bands. So again, we were, it really wasn't our time. Uh, so I just wanted, and then a little bit later, a year or two later, then it became disco. It wasn't
Yes.
rock and roll bands on, it was disco on the charts. Um, so yes, Elton John, most people think that the album with your song on it was the first album because that was the first popular album. It was actually his second album. But yeah, no, immediately when that came out, that and I like the early stuff, Tumbleweed Connection. I have maybe about 4 or 5 Elton John uh, albums. But again, I think he was thought more of a pop type singer, even though there was the rock and roll piano in it. But when you think about it, a lot of it was ballady.
Yes, yeah, no, it's interesting. You're obviously famous for Laurel Canyon and the sensitive singer-songwriters that we all embraced so much, didn't we, at that time? And obviously Carole King's Tapestry and Joni Mitchell and all that gang. Did you sort of flirt in that area at all of life, or was that another part of the city you didn't touch?
No, I really wasn't interested. I mean, I might have had some of the records here and there, but I really liked, like I said, the rock band sound. It was just Meteor was more exciting. It was, I mean, there were a lot of elements about it. So let me kind of, because you're talking about the 70s, let me just throw out some records to you just to see whether you're aware of them or not.
Yes.
So again, you have to think through the 70s as a rock writer, I didn't hear every record that came out, but I heard a lot of records that you never made the charts that most people weren't aware of. So for instance, are you familiar with Ducks Deluxe?
Yes, Scott, I did an interview
Okay,
with.
Ducks, they came out of England, they came out of the pub rock scene, but just great records, so I love them. They kind of evolved into the Motors, who I
Yes.
love the Motors. Um, there's Deke Leonard, A Hard Way to Go by. He was in Man,
Oh
people.
no, I didn't get that one at all. No, sorry, I missed that one.
Okay. By the way, Nils Lofgren, who people kind of know more later after he joined Bruce Springsteen, in the early '70s, he was in a band called Grin.
Green, yes.
Neil Neil Young was a fan of Grin and kind of helped their career. So they did 3 albums. 2 of them are really
there's
good pop rock
so there was
songs.
No Mercy. Keith,
No
which one
Mercy. What
does
do you
have
mean?
Keith Don't Go On? And then there was yeah, I went through a bit of a Lofgren phase actually. So
This was Grin.
yes,
This was
okay.
okay. So I'll give you another good record. Hawkwind. A lot of people know Hawkwind,
Yes,
probably from Britain. So Robert Calvert,
yes,
Ejection. So Robert Calvert was originally the lead vocalist and the lyricist.
yeah.
And do you know Ejection at all?
No, but I should do because I did an interview with somebody who wrote a book about the man recently. God.
Okay. Anyway,
Um,
by the way, play Ejection. It's really great. I mean, it's basically the members of Hawkwind play on it. So anyway, what I'm saying is that the
oh yes,
you
no,
know there
I'll give that a go. I'll give that a go. But the other band that I love, which was possibly in that area, was Spirit, the 12
yes,
Dreams. That was one of those
definitely
albums.
definitely a fan of Spirit. I write about them in the Time Has Come Today, my rock and roll diary. So at one point, Randy California had this album, Potato Land.
Oh God, I got that with
Okay,
the
so we
booklet.
made the deal for Potato Land that came out on Rhino first, and then I licensed it to Beggar's Banquet in England, in Line in Germany.
Yes.
So and that made the album charts in England.
God, that's such a great
Um,
because he did an album
but
before that called Spirit of 76 and
that was
there's
right. But that was and that's. But anyway, what I want to say is, so we had the relationship with Andy California, like who I write about. But then within the last few years or so, Jay Ferguson,
mhm.
who was another main guy in Spirit. So I've had lunch with him a few times. He's done extremely well over the last 10 years doing composing for TV shows.
Right. Oh, that's
TV shows
good.
here.
Yes. Is Ed
Yeah.
Cassidy still alive?
No, Yeah.
Right. I just, yes, it was always that thing. Yeah. So then, just kind of briefly, then. So that was. Yes, I'll have to check out the Robert Calvert song. I know, there was that was a kind of golden period. I think it was also that period that Simon House was in the band, who also then played with David Bowie in one of
And
his
by the
live.
way, I have to say that I was on assignment from Rolling Stone when I was in London. This was in 1973, and I was flown to Dusseldorf. They were playing a club outside of Dusseldorf, and I, um, I chatted with Lemmy, and I spent the night with them. They were all in a like a dormitory room, like an open room.
Right.
And I had breakfast with them the next day, like this is outside of Dusseldorf. I can't remember the town in Germany, but yeah. So I did. I got to see the space ritual. I got to see Stacia and see all of Stacia, and but spend time with them. So that's in the my British Invasion, talking about my 1973 tour.
Oh, right. God, that's your British invasion, because it sort of doesn't sit next to Herman's Hermits, does it? Hermits. Yes, that was quite a different outfit, different vibe. Yeah, so then 75 comes, so the band is
Yes.
over. So then
Right.
how do you navigate that next period once the rock and roll dream is gone?
Okay, so I was a college rep. After Paul Rappaport graduated, I became the next year the college rep at Columbia Records at UCLA. I wanted to work full time at Columbia or another major label. None of them could foresee the potential that I thought that I had. And that evolved into where I started working at the Rhino store. And then at a certain point, I said to Richard Foos, who owned the store, "Oh, let's start a record label in the back room of the store. I know how to do this because I put out two singles and an album." So we
Yes.
started really slowly. We put out Wild Man Fisher was the first single. The second single, the Winos, All the Wrong Girls Like Me, I wanted to, get it placed with another label, but none were interested. So then by default, that was the second Rhino single. So that evolved into, through the years, growing our label. We did local bands, we did some novelty records. Neither of those were profitable, but then we hit upon doing the reissues. And the reissues were, we had a new philosophy. In some cases, when other labels had these out, it was how do we squeeze out more profits from these old masters? For us, it was these records are important to us. The music was important growing up. How could we reissue these with more care? Let's make it sound really good, and in some cases, better when they came out. Um, we tracked down rare photos. We had insightful liner notes. So basically, we upgraded the quality, and it turns out there were a lot of music fans who thought, the way they did, and then that gradually built. And every year we did better than the year before until we became, a really nice business.
Yes. So like Cherry Red Records, in a way. Would that be right?
Yes,
Right. God.
Ian McNay.
Yes, that's right. And then did you start sort of developing artists as well as putting reissues out as well?
Yes, but the problem with the new artists were, among the better local bands in the Los Angeles area, is that local radio wouldn't play the records, whether it was, in an era of payola or other considerations. It was very disappointing to us when you had these bands that had followings, but without the airplay, they didn't really sell that much, and most we lost money on.
Right. God, that's all good. So how long were you with Rhino, by the way?
Okay, well, again, we started in the back room of the store. We look upon the first year of the label, 1978, when we put out, we made more of a commitment by putting out albums. So that was like, okay, this is more of a commitment. 1978. I left towards the end of 2001,
Right.
and because it became part of the Warner Music, which is still part of the Warner Music, which includes Warner Brothers, Atlantic, Elektra, for instance, and it was my contract was through the end of 2001. So even though Richard and I were doing even though the label was doing really well, considering because of the illegal downloading within the industry, sales were declining, profits were declining. Ours were still increasing. We were doing well in a difficult market.
Yes.
The new head of the Warner Music Group decided he wanted his own person there. He wasn't interested in extending our contracts. So, it was time for us to go.
Yes. So another artist that I loved during the 80s period and had to track records, Richard Pryor. Did you get to work with Richard, by the way?
Okay, by the way, we did put out Richard Pryor box set.
Yes. Did you get to meet him?
Well, no, but the problem is, so I think you remember about, his freebasing and how that blew up in front of him with the fire. You're aware of that
Yes.
part,
Yeah,
right?
very much.
So he was enfeebled. He was confined to a wheelchair. So while Richard Pryor was not my account, I didn't deal with that. We dealt, I believe, mostly or primarily, with his wife at the time.
Right.
And by the
Yes.
way, I mean, really happy that we made the catalog available. I mean, Richard Pryor, still to this day, really important as far as shaping.
Well, yes. Well, as a young person, I remember being very keen to sort of get into Lenny Bruce, Lord Butley, and Richard Pryor. There was on Channel 4 started, playing some interesting films, and one being live on Sunset Strip or something. So that was exciting. So then after 2001, you're back on the road again, so to speak. What happens then for your, the rest of the years?
Okay. So towards the end of the 90s into that, I started to get into producing films. And the main reason was how, if you have a song in a film that's popular, it, not only do you sell records, you can revitalize
Oh God, yes.
artists. Like a good example is we had put out a double album, the Righteous Brothers, and then Righteous Brothers anthology. Unchained Melody was used in Ghost, the
Yes.
meme or with the doing the sculpture thing. So we ended up selling the best of our Righteous Brothers anthology. It sold well enough so we had a gold record, primarily because the exposure of that one song in the film.
Mm-hmm.
Pulp Fiction, I made a deal with Dick Dale for his catalog. I licensed Miserlou over the opening credits. For some of your listeners who might not be familiar, Dick Dale was considered king of the surf guitar.
Oh God,
Primarily
yes. John Peel loved
instrumentalist.
him. Yes.
Yes. Okay, so in 1994, when people went to the theater and they saw Pulp Fiction, most of the people, they didn't know who Dick Dale was. They didn't know that this record over the opening credits was 20 years old. They heard a piece of music, they liked it. So not only did the soundtrack sell, but we sold our Dick Dale's greatest hits. It did extremely well. So that's what I'm saying. I like good music is timeless.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was thinking. So we did 2 studio features, neither of which were box office success. We had made a deal with Roulette Records, and part of that was the Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers catalog. The big hit that people tend to know is "Why Do Fools Fall in Love." So that was the movie. We did that with Warner Brothers. Halle Berry starred in it.
Yeah.
It was a great showcase for the music of Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, but the movie was not a success. We also did from Hunter S. Thompson's book Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. We did that movie. Johnny Depp starred in that. That didn't do well either. By the way, I should point out that in the book, the Rhino Records story, I have a chapter on each of those.
Right. I will. I do love that book, and the film was all right. The soundtrack was lovely.
By the way, I agree with you. Uh, I thought Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, I was disappointed because the book is so much funnier than the movie. The movie doesn't have that much humor in it. So I'm kind of in accord with you. Then I did for VH1, the VH1 channel, I did the Monkees biopic, Daydream Believers.
Right.
And after I left Rhino, Howard Kaylan and the Turtles had this great story. The Turtles go to London. They hang out with Graham Nash. He plays them Sergeant Pepper before it's released. They go to the Speakeasy Club. Howard ends up having dinner with Jimi Hendrix when people in America didn't know who he was because he hadn't come over yet. So that's My Dinner with Jimmy.
Right.
A low budget film, a Rhino film. But the thing is, it's one of the few instances where somebody who actually was there wrote the screenplay, Howard Kaylan wrote the screenplay. So that's what I was thinking of doing. But again, some of the things I tried to do, a movie, Tommy James and the Shondells, big in America, lots of hits.
Yeah.
I tried to do that movie. I wanted to do My Sharona, a true rock and roll romance. It wasn't a good time for music movies. Most of them were flops at the box office, so it was not a good time. So that evolved into doing the first book because I thought if I didn't capture the history of the Rhino label, it would be lost.
Yes.
That's
God.
where I started doing the books.
You must love this writer here called Joel Selvin, because I think he normally does all these kind of people that you quite like, isn't it?
Oh, by the way, I'm friendly with Joel. I don't really see him, but I think I read maybe 7 of his books. Yes.
Yes, I would imagine when you were sort of mentioning that. Yes, God, the movie. I mean, people. So you got this one, My Dinner with Jimmy, which reminds me of that song. Other one, My Dinner with Andre. That was a film. Yeah, so yeah, it's kind of tricky because there's a lot of films coming out now. I don't know. Obviously you are aware that everyone's writing their memoir at the moment, and there's a lot of films and exhibitions coming out left, right, and centre. So there's kind of certainly an interest, especially what I've found from the bands from the 80s. So you must be aware of this kind of fascination for the fan to sort of discover a little bit more about their favourite artists from back then.
Okay, so in my books, I try to be really accurate. My memory is pretty good, and in some cases, you can check things, but all of my accounts were with people I interacted with. So, there's none of the chapters or entries aren't people that I didn't interact with. But what I want to say is, a lot of times when people are doing memoirs, they're thinking, okay, here's the story or here's what I remember. They're not interested in how accurate I am. They're not interested in somebody telling them that they're wrong. So in some cases, not that I think we have time to go into today, but it's I've read things and go, well, that doesn't make sense. I don't think that happened. Um, so yes, but I mean, I do read quite a few of these. I'll just recommend one to
Oh,
your listeners. One which I think is among the best, if not the best, is Robbie Krieger's book. He's really
okay.
he's really smart and he remembers a lot. And anybody who's interested in the Doors, uh,
Yes.
that's a good one.
Because some of them, obviously very interesting. Some people who write or ghost write it very well for them. But some are just, you just think I'm not that interested. Okay, so Robbie's a good one. So then, with those projects, what's been the last 5 years? Have you been sort of working on any other projects at this point?
No, I mean, as I mentioned, my diary, my rock and roll diary, Time Has Come Today, that came out about 2 years ago. So I've been working on that. And then kind of the next project has been the reissue, the enhanced reissue, I should say, of Savage Young Winos by
Yes.
Mogan, David and his Winos. Let me just, give a plug. It's coming out March 6th. It'll be available as an LP, CD, and digital download at the regular places people get it, or they could pre-order it at Bandcamp. But let me give you one humorous anecdote, because as much as most of the music was really straight and serious, as we talked about the band, there was that element of humor, like doing, Nose Job.
Yes.
So there was an exploitive Beatles record that came out in 1964. Exploitive meaning it was mostly the Beatles backing up Tony Sheridan.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And it was called Savage Young Beatles. So that's why I called ours
Um,
Savage Young Winos. And I copied the cover when we reissued it. So, okay, so you see the image of the photo of the winos there. Are you looking at
yes,
that?
I've got it
Yeah.
in front of
You
me.
see us in the leather jackets.
Yes.
So if you think about the Beatles' first photo session in Liverpool, you know, they came from Germany. They have those leather jackets on, right? And so if you look at those two photos, you'll see the reference.
Oh, yes, with your bass player in Paul, same
Right,
as Paul
like a Paul
McCartney.
McCartney with the bass up, right?
Right, this is it. And the Pete Best look-alike. Well, yeah,
Well, it was
there's
not
just,
lookalikes, but just more the leather jackets thing.
yeah, the
So
moody
the
stare.
thing is that, there's a number of layers depending on where you're looking, whether it's, that, or whether it's, in the liner notes talking about writing the song for Peter Noon that he didn't like, or so, reasons, or there's like one of the songs, I'm Just a Kid from the Midwest, being a big Who fan, um, who's next, Barbara O'Reilly, the concept of teenage wasteland. Wow,
Yes.
phrase. What is that? So I took, what Roger Daltrey was singing about on that song, and I think, okay, if I took the character that he projected, and if I took, okay, what would be the next step? What would this character do? So that is one of the songs on the album. But again, that was a demoed song because we never actually did a proper recording on that. So I put on, two demos of really good songs that I thought, uh, should be on the album, but we never did a proper band recording.
Yes. I do love She's Not There. I think that's a great version you done on that. This collection. I think it's just from the Zombies, isn't it? So that was
Well,
a
yeah, I
good.
wanted some live tracks on there. So there's two live tracks on the LP and five on the CD, so that people could hear, well, here's what we sounded like, and there's no overdubs or whatever it is. This is it.
Yes, and has the are you going to have a launch party with the members of the band getting together over a drink or two, or just some sort of celebration? Because it must feel quite nice thinking that was 53 years ago, and you're sort of yes, you've got this amazing archive collection to promote and listen to and sort of travel down memory lane with.
Well, that would be nice. But so, Paul, whom you interviewed, he lives in New York, and the drummer lives in Nashville. As we know, there's a lot of musicians who moved to Nashville from other areas, like the members of Motley Crue, for instance. And so, yeah, not everybody's in the same city, but I mean, we are in touch, and I feel, I've always felt really good about those people, and our whether consistently or not, we have been in touch through the years. So,
Yes.
yeah, it was just a very special time, and it's really great for ourselves and for fans of, the music that we were doing, to actually be able to experience it all in like one, newly collected compilation.
Yes, Liberation Hall. God, they've been doing some great stuff, actually. So, well, look, I hope that was okay. But thank you for a trip down your sort of early 70s period. It was kind of quite a lot there to sort of untangle, really. But Hopefully that wasn't too painful.
No, it's good. Let me give you one other thing for you to remember so you can
Yes.
listen to it. This was a Trog single.
Oh,
I
yes.
think maybe 72, maybe. It feels like a woman, and it's really heavy. It was produced by Roger Bain, who did Black Sabbath. So again,
Okay.
that's kind of a special record that never really happened.
No, right. I'm definitely checking that out as well. But look, thank you ever so much for your time. This has been amazing. I'll keep in touch with dear old Randy for this, but that's been good. So look, have a lovely afternoon, and yes, all the best for the record. And I will definitely check out some of your books actually because they look really interesting. So yes,
Okay.
but
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Yeah, take care and all the best. Take care there. I'll say
Okay.
goodbye. Here I go. Bye. And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. You probably guessed that, but a massive thank you to Harold Bronson for giving me the time. This has been the C86 Show. David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on any of the social media platform sites. Just do C86 Show. All these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Have a great week. Stay safe.